When Christopher Plummer was first walked on the set with Julie Andrews, there was almost too much of her. Just right. Endlessly she was punished. Good, and already respected for her work on the stage. But behind the scenes, Plummer didn't take to it. That photo. In fact, elements of it are deeply got on his nerves. What he told me afterward wasn't about hatred, but something much tougher. Clash of characters, aspirations, and his own internal friction. And the fact is, would silently mold behind that strain one of the most memorable performances in history. The Sound of Music. When Christopher Plummer came to play Captain Von Trapp, he wasn't going to step into a project he believed in. Afterwards, he was already in at this stage in his career. Serious stage actor with strong identity in the classical drama. And the prospect of playing in a family-friendly musical felt like a move the incorrect way. He watched the script as saccharine, even not realistic, and he was afraid that the tone would hurt his credibility. That's mindset constructed a barrier before the shoot hadn't even really begun, and it colored his perception of everything surrounding him, includes Julie Andrews. Julie Andrews, on the other hand, took the project with full commitment. She had recently had a great success and had a reputation for professionalism and warmth. She was on set attentive, always ready and cheerful, even in adverse circumstances, to the many, making her the emotional center. Production. But as for Plummer, it felt, especially in those early days, mind-blowing. He later called her too good, too together, almost too in the tone he was struggling against. It wasn't that he didn't like her personally. She was what she symbolized. Everything on the movie. He was not sure he wanted to be part of it. This is the disconnect was aggravated by the atmosphere they were working inside. Filming in Austria was difficult and hard. Weather, long days filming, and physically hard conditions. Andrews was in practically every scene, balancing her workload as well as caring for her young daughter on set. In the meantime, Plummer had owned him frustrations, not just with the movie, but his private life. His wife was falling to pieces, and he dealt with it by emotionally separating himself from the set, preferring to spend his evenings elsewhere than participating in the production. In the time, Andrews was having her own kind of solitude. Her husband had been not present during the shooting, and despite she flanked by a big cast, had several lonely evenings at her hotel room after a long day at work. Both performers were dealing with loneliness, but very distinct ways. Andrews leaned to focus and discipline. Plummer leaned toward the opposition and separation. That contrast only grew. The emotional gulf separating them in the initial phases of filming. But there was an obvious undercurrent between the two. Later, both felt that they loved each other throughout this time. But these feelings were complex for situation, busy schedules, personal responsibilities, and the volatility in their respective marriage. Rather than drawing them together, it developed a tension that never released, lingering under their professional interactions. That tension, together with Plummer's early unease about beginning to take form the project depiction of Captain Von Trapp. Instead, than melting into the warmth that is intended of the role, he preferred a more stiff, distanced interpretation. It started as private defiance, slowly evolved into a defining artistic choice, one that may transform the whole film. Finally, was felt. Christopher Plummer's displeasure with the project did not remain disguised as professional politeness. It came out plainly in his speech. Discusses the film during and after the manufacturing. It was famously mocked by him, calling it the sound of mucus, a comment that was not spoken in jest among friends, but a reflection of how seriously he refused the tone of the tale. The story was too much for him. Polished, emotionally predictable, and not as elaborate as he was used to exploring on stage. That attitude didn't be in interviews. Only it had an effect on how he presented himself on set, his treatment of scenes, and how he worked with the material. Julie Andrews knew well about such strain. Never ever, even if it was direct, aggressive. She didn't get that Plummer did share her excitement for the project. But she didn't confront him, she concentrated on keeping things steady on set. Her method was the same. She had stood based on her performance, was treated everyone with respect, and avoid pointless fighting. This disparity in mindset set up a mild but continual difference between them. Andrews aimed to maintain the emotional tone of the picture. Plummer, of course, pressed against it, refusing anything he felt overly emotional or fake. That resistance started to shape his portrayal of Captain Von Trapp as a that neither actor had fully predicted at the time. Instead of providing a romance lead, Plummer leaned into moderation. He played the game character with emotional detachment, authority, and a certain rigidity which echoed his own doubts within. His performance was not dulled by or blatant warmth in the first stages of the tale. Instead, Von Trapp is controlled, even threatening widower father who struggled to say feeling. This decision caused attention throughout the film, which was the polar opposite, with a more open and expressive vibe that Andrews brought to her character, Maria. What was special about this dynamic was that effective was that it was not quite scheduled. The tug and pull of emotion between the characters reflected the real life difference of the actors. Andrews was warmth, optimism, and emotional openness, while Plummer embedded resistance, control, and an unwillingness to really get into the tone of the tale. Instead of diluting the film, this contrast was stronger. It wrote a convincing transition arc for Von Trapp, enabling his eventual emotional change to feeling instead of earned automatic. Then Plummer, over time, started to realize that his first resistance had been unintended, added a worthwhile contribution. His training, resistance to really go after the substance, forced him to look for a more practical one perception of the character that eschewed hyperbole. He then on stated that without this equilibrium, could have been film too sentimental. Julie Andrews herself would eventually point this out, explaining how his performance gave a much-needed edge that prevented the narrative from being lost its trustworthiness. Earlier he was frustrated, but slowly Plummer's perspective shifted. Like The film still had a resonance for audience and sustain its cultural influence. He started to rethink what it had reached. He didn't see it as any more a simple musical, yet as a tale that resonated with individuals on a more emotional plane. He respects the idea grew, and so did his awareness of the significance of Andrews in make it function. As the shooting progressed, the split tension, Julie Andrews, Christopher Plummer, began to move more softly, more individual manner. What seemed like annoyance gave way gently to comprehension, not by theatricals, discussions or debates, but daily surveillance. Plummer saw how Andrews took it. The production weight without grievance. How she stayed focused, though appearing in almost every scene, and how she juggled her commitments as a lead actress and a mother at where that constancy started to challenge his previous preconceptions about her too perfect, showing instead a level of discipline which demanded respect. Both actors at the same time were mentally ill in their private life, and that same common developed a silent vulnerability link between them. Andrews was navigating a tense married and parenting her small kids. Strange land, daughter, often withdrawing to her hotel room after long days of shooting. Plummer with the breakup of his own relationship. Differently, select distance, distraction, instead of self-examination. Such contradictory ways of coping meant. And they rarely talked about their circumstances with one another directly, and the awareness was there, informing how they related to each other on the set. It was throughout this moment when the mutual attraction grew stronger, though it never was anything more past that. Both would later confess that there was a true chemistry between them, a sense that other conditions, their connection could have gone a different road. But timing and responsibility that maintained it. Possibilities, a long way off. Her first thought was of her daughter, Andrew, and her professional responsibilities, while Plummer's personal life was also disturbed for nothing meaningful to start with. Instead of taking them more closely, these variables strengthen a limit that neither of them wanted to crossing. Interestingly, that unresolvable stress translated literally into their performances. The emotional divide between Captain Maria and Von Trapp in the first sections of the narrative was true because it was true to life. Plumbing 14. Andrew's guardedness and openness were not easy decisions on what to do. They were extensions of who they were at the moment of their life. This gave their own scenes a natural rhythm which did not rely on overblown emotion, but instead built up slowly by little changes in tone and engagement. As time goes by, Plummer began to concede that Andrew was not going to be resist, but something that quickened his own performance. She was able to stay emotionally present in every scene, even forced him to connect more deeply when he felt the want to hold back. Instead of tempering his approach, it urged him to finish it, making a balance that made their screen make the relationship more believable. This realization was a tipping point, not only in the way he saw her but in his had approached the whole film. In the 1940s, years that followed the story about Christopher Plummer and Julie Andrews moved from a low tension to anything far more revealing. As the picture continued to receive recognition and considered one of the most lasting works in Plummer found himself in a cinema. Kept asking about a project he had once opposed. Instead of preserving his previous contemptuous tone, began to communicate more nuancedly, slowly. His first reaction was to acknowledge had been influenced as much by his own private material as by expectations. What he had originally thought too emotional, he would later see as a thing audiences who strongly identified with, and that understanding made him have to reconsider the film, and the folks that made it work. That was Julie Andrews at the heart of re-evaluation throughout time. Plummer publicly acknowledged her as the emotional heart of the film, united. He confessed that the persistence, the discipline, and she can stay entirely committed under pressure had established a base that permitted the tale to connect. Once he did, but he thought her optimism overdone. Learned that it was just certain quality that kept the story. Without this, the balance of his had immediately sought to inject might not have been restrained by enough to sustain the film. Theirs different techniques were no longer viewed as a confrontation but as an essential blend. This perspective became even more evident at public reunions and retrospectives conversations, when the two shared the stage in decades after their long-term relationship was history that has gone far beyond the uncertainty in the original manufacture. They both burst up laughing in a familiar sort of way, constructed over years, not only work, respect, but real love. Plummer would say dry, teasing things, and Andrews would reply in kind, giving the impression of two persons who understood each other well. Which comfort did not come from perfect starting, but from a relationship which been tried and tweaked and eventually increased with time. 1. Some of the more telling moments were when Andrews had made no secret of Plummer's role in stopping the film from getting too sentimental. She explained his upbringing. Picture of Captain Von Trapp gave a needed crispness and urgency that anchored the story to a place. Instead of just dismisses the tone of the picture, he have unwittingly fashioned it into something more balanced than Plummer conceded that he had resisted. Influenced his performance, and the director had learned to tap that energy in a way that benefits the movie. The source of frustration was heaped on. Final result. Their reflections too demonstrated how much of their early tension had been in time with and situation, not personal incompatibility. Both had joined the project at times of trouble in their lives, carrying emotional baggage that affected how they felt about the job. With distance was more easily separated. Those personal battles of the relationships they built on set. What was a grasp of what was left. The strengths of each other and that their disparities had the knowledge. Has never been a blemish. At the end of Christopher Plummer got the latter stages of his life, how he spoke regarding Julie Andrews and the sound of music had been completely changed. The cynicism and opposition that had formerly characterized his public remarks were still part of his individuality, but they aren't anymore. Had the same weight. They instead were balanced with a clear-cut acknowledgement of what the picture possessed. accomplished and Andrews's part in that achievement. He didn't put himself in opposition to the project but also as someone who has been part of it in a way he didn't quite understand at the time. Julie Andrews never posed on her side. Their first chemistry as conflict or dis-ease, always she talked about Plummer as a great actor who brought power and verisimilitude to a story that could just as easily have been too sleek. Her thoughts made it plain that any of the tension that was there during she never thought of production as something on to. Instead, she concentrated on what follows: the years of friendship, shared experiences, and continued to respect which characterized their relationship. Long after the shooting had finished, that perspective changed the way the narrative was. Got it. Moving it away from a story of disliking into something more complicated than that. Plummer, when died at 91, Andrews's evolution was recorded in the answer. Perfect clarity, she didn't go back to any of the early disappointments or differences. She characterized him, instead, as an actor par excellence and a loved friend, stressing the comedy, the memories, and the manner in which they lasting for decades. That there mirrored not only personal loss but the conclusion of a chapter that had began in difficult circumstances and evolved into something important and permanently. It also solidified the belief that any space that once existed between them was long established. Their fellow cast members' answers. Members also agreed with that comprehension. Those who worked among them, Plummer was remembered not as far away or hard, but as authoritative, talented, and quite kind, especially to the younger players that looked up to him as a role father figure. They at the same time kept calling Andrews the someone emotional heart of the group, who brought warmth and togetherness to the whole production. Those altogether viewpoints gave a complete image of what truly happened. A couple very diverse personalities coming together, not in perfect harmony yet somehow, which ultimately made us all tougher involved. Looking back, the suggestion that Andrews turns Plummer couldn't stand. Less about truth and more to do with reading. What he had difficulty with was not the person, but what she represented. At a time when he thought unrelated to the project. More than. The difference became clearer as time went by. And the story changed accordingly. The tension that had formerly marked their only initial working connection. A layer of a much bigger story, one admiration, unvoiced, that held sentiments, creative conflict, and permanent friendship. So when you come back to their story, do you think that early on anxiety really enhanced their performances stronger, or would the movie have worked just as well without? Say it. Your ideas in the comments, and not. And subscribe for more. Don't forget to like backstage stories like these.